Already forgotten, my stream is live. Forgotten? Hello? Are you there? Can you hear me?
All right, guys. Welcome to the stream. I am Tim from Millennials, and I am here with Bold Like a Leopard. How you doing tonight, sir?
Thank God it's been a long day of work to come to this huge cringe fest we're about to indulge in, so thanks for the idea.
Absolutely. And we are on Stream Me as well, successfully. I think you are playing the stream on your end, because I'm hearing the audio double.
All right. No, I have mine's on mute. It must be on your end.
Okay, one sec. All right, so we're looking at ads today from the Super Bowl 2019. I did not watch the Super Bowl myself. I heard the entire game was a cringe fest. What do you think of what did you think of the game, and can you give us some highlights, Bold?
Yeah, even going into the game, most people, I think, across the world weren't very optimistic because they thought that, especially in LA's case, they didn't deserve to be there because they got shoehorned in there by the referees on a no-call penalty. And then when the game started, it was pretty clear that LA really didn't deserve to be there because they had literally no offense for the entirety of the game. So it was basically a punt fest, and Brady kind of also had like a really so-so game. Completed a few passes to Julian Edelman, no real razzle-dazzle plays except for one great pass to Gronkowski. And that was about it. It was probably the worst football game I've ever seen, and I've been watching football since I was 7 years old. So that's my impression.
Yeah, that sounds absolutely terrible. So, with that terrible game came some terrible ads, and you know what? It wasn't as cringy as it was last year. I know there was a couple hot ones last year. This year we have a lot of women empowerment. We have a lot of mainstream media trying to prop themselves up. We have car commercials that want to also empower women. So let's jump right into the statistics of the Super Bowl. So right here, I have pulled up from the Federal list. 2019 Super Bowl viewership was the lowest in a decade. So basically down here, you can see that in the past 10 years, this has probably been the worst showing, and for good reason, because it has been embroiled in controversy over the past year in terms of, Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, the NFL blatantly, going with the narrative of the mainstream media and bending a knee, as it were, to SJWs and a lot of PC political correctness. What's your take on that, Bold? What have you been noticing this year that probably would have caused something like this?
Look, I think for a lot of the year, there was actually signs that it would get better than last year because the NFL was actually working hard to focus a little less on off the field stuff and more on the football itself. There were a lot of very high scoring games with, especially with the Chiefs and the Rams. They had like some pretty high powered offense. So I was actually expecting going into the playoffs that it would work out better for the NFL. The problem is, and you mentioned Colin Kaepernick, was that he started this, I guess, I wouldn't call it like a huge campaign, but this whispering action among people to discourage artists from appearing at the Super Bowl because he has a collusion lawsuit against NFL franchises. So really, it's kind of ridiculous because some of the people who bowed to his boycott, like Cardi B, they went to the Super Bowl week. They took part in the festivities. Cardi B, in her case, even did some sort of like ridiculous event with Roger Goodell, who is the commissioner of the NFL. But because she actually boycotted appearing at the Super Bowl halftime show, it's considered as if she fulfilled the aims of the boycott, which is kind of stupid if you think about it. Also, Kaepernick himself has the massive sponsorship deal from Nike, which it also produced. They're the sponsors of the NFL uniforms. So he himself, if you really look at what he's talking about, he can't even fulfill his own terms of the boycott. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and with that Cardi B thing and all those boycotts, it's funny how she ended up being in one of the Super Bowl commercials. We're not going to cover that one because that one was pretty okay. It's just she made a cameo, which I thought was funny. And that echoing that you guys heard in the beginning, I'm actually running this off, what is it, Restream.io to get this on Stream Me and YouTube simultaneously and Periscope. And basically, one of them was actually running in the background at the same time. So we should have that solved. And I see that Redskin fan is in the chat. How are you, sir? And thank you for letting us know that the sound is better. So, yeah, with Colin Kaepernick getting that deal, could you imagine Nike if they were so diabolical that they're like, you know what? A lot of this political correctness stuff is, spurring up. Let's, make false outrage and then sign Colin Kaepernick up when he's at the lowest point. And then he'll make us millions. And that's basically what's happening right now. Could you imagine if that was their intention the entire time?
I don't feel that it was. Are you talking about the NFL or Nike?
I'm talking about Nike. The NFL was a casualty, but for a company like Nike, the only company to take down the NFL's ratings to such an extreme, that's a lot of power that they gave to themselves. I think if that was a calculated move by Nike, it's honestly probably one of the most genius moves I've ever seen a company make.
Well, I think you might have a point there because in the first few days of that, it was thought that it would be a major problem because I think Nike's stock tanked a few points for a couple days, but people really forgot about it, and yeah, they've come back in terms of stock, and also there's a lot of people who simply, all they care about is, virtue signaling for a cause like Colin Kaepernick or something. They don't really care. And plus, I don't think his clothing line really has been a hit anyway. So for Nike, it was kind of like they didn't suffer very much from it except for a short-term stock dip, and then a lot of their other lines of clothing, their Tiger Woods and of course the Air Jordan brand. I mean, they're untouchable. The Air Jordan brand is untouchable. So they pretty much
have staples.
What?
They have their staple brands. I mean, people are going to buy them regardless. That's the point.
Oh, people are never. The Air Jordan brand is basically unbeatable. It'll never. And Tiger Woods probably is. I'm not really into golf, but those are brands they'll never have any sort of dip in sales. I think people will buy them forever because they're completely firmly established. So I think for Nike it was kind of it was a very low risk proposition if you look at it in hindsight. I think I was wrong when I thought that it would damage the company.
And I think a lot of people were wrong because everyone's like, oh, Nike's done. They're ripping Nike stuff off their pants. But meanwhile, it's getting, as an advertiser, if I was thinking like an advertiser, a huge conglomerate of a company, they've now made themselves into a meme where everybody needs to destroy their stuff. So their name is in everybody's mouths for at least a month. So you're talking about that, and the NFL is actually the ones. The NFL made moves of their own that made their own bed, like actually, caving into a lot of the bullshit. You know what I mean? They caved into a ton of stuff, like basically just, oh yeah, we're not going to set rules for people to stand during the play, during the national anthem. We're not going to set rules for this, that, and the other thing that just made other people pissed off. I mean, the NFL didn't make their own bed to a certain extent. Would you agree?
Yeah, but they're kind of living in a world where it's not as easy as it used to be. Look, I mean, when I was probably growing up, there was no there was no connection between football and all of these other social issues. You know, most of the time, I think football was really seen as separate from the rest of society's like social problems, and I think you know, at that time it was more music was where you were seeing a lot of this over politicization and what you know there was a lot of this stuff about censoring music and stuff like that. But nowadays the NFL has to live with this woke culture, and a lot of these athletes have become inculcated into that culture because remember it was only a few years ago that you had this whole Michael Sam controversy, if you remember that, where they were basically trying to make this huge story that finally there's a gay guy in the NFL, but the guy I think hardly even played in training camp. And then they also had this wasn't in the NFL, but they had the University of Missouri had, which has to do with Michael Sam too. They kind of staged a protest in regards to the University of Missouri controversy with the poop swastika and all of that, if you remember that. So
I do remember that.
So yeah, the football team insinuated themselves or injected themselves into that controversy by doing a walk-off. And basically, since then, it's been like a watershed. You have players, of course, with Trump, it's gotten worse. But you know, let's not deceive ourselves. I mean, we had when the Rams were still playing in St. Louis, which they conveniently have forgotten they used to play in. They came out onto the field with their hands up, like the hands up and don't shoot, right? But they never protested when their team actually abandoned St. Louis. So, you know, it's just gotten worse and worse. It's ridiculous.
Exactly. So now I think it's coming to a boiling point. I think they've realized that. That's why they toned down a lot of the SJW crap this time around. I think they've seen it. And with we're going to go into our first ad in a bit. The Washington Post decided to pat themselves on the back, and that's already been a firestorm. We're kind of late to the game, but we're going to cover it for you anyway. So I find it interesting that, you know, with all this stuff going on, they decided to spend $5 million on an ad, and we're going to pull that up right now. Let's go into it.
When we exercise our rights, when we soar to our greatest heights, when we mourn and pray, when our neighbors are at risk, when our nation is threatened, there's someone to gather the facts, to bring you the story, no matter the cost. Because knowing empowers us. Knowing helps us decide. Knowing keeps us free.
Then it ends with democracy dies in darkness, yeah. All right. So that ad's interesting because it's funny that they show, you know, all journalists are out there on the front lines, which we haven't seen a lot of in a long time. They're usually behind their desk or faking stories like Anderson Cooper. They'll knee in, you know, waist high water. But, you know, it's interesting to me that they said when our country is threatened, they show the Oklahoma City bombing. If you think of an event that was detrimental to changing how the entire country is run, how people travel for the rest of their lives, how everything fundamentally, when it comes to human rights and our privacy, has been invaded by, what event would come to your mind?
Oh, the September 11th terrorist attacks, of course.
Exactly. You're talking about a casualty count of 3,000 people. You're talking about the biggest known attack on U.S. soil, probably in our nation's history, besides the Revolutionary War. You know, basically just it's insane to me that they, you know, of course they choose that event because, of course, a white domestic terrorist did it. It can't be Islamic terror. You can't show Islamic terror to the masses during Super Bowl Sunday. Also that, you know, they're covering, you know, D-Day and all this. It's just, it's pandering. And we're going to open there's actually an article about this rightly titled "Washington Post Reporters Bash Their Own Paper Over Expensive Super Bowl Ads." So basically, a lot of these people, a lot of his employees over at the Washington Post, their pensions have been frozen. It's been hemorrhaging money. I think the Washington Post is technically a profitable paper. Most aren't. That's why you're seeing the huge journalistic layoffs that are happening right now. I think it's interesting that they spend so much money. Jeff Bezos, by the way, owns the Washington Post, for anyone that doesn't know. They basically spend so much money on this ad. Meanwhile, their employees are, suffering with their wages. Look at this. Now and freeze our pensions, paying equal wage, and strengthen maternity benefits. So, there's a lot of leftist talking points because obviously it's a leftist think tank at the Washington Post. But, you get the idea of where these people's heads are at. What's your take on that?
Look, I think that they do have a point that the paper shouldn't be about, advertising at the Super Bowl while also, compromising on the employee benefits. So that there's kind of there's a dual issue here. So one thing is that the corporation and its messaging to its own employees are telling them to tighten their belts, and then on the other hand, they're splurging on this Super Bowl ad. So I would say, yeah, they definitely could have spent the money in better ways. But the Washington Post does have to reach new subscribers and everything. They have to get more people to come in, and this is something that has been done for a long time by all sorts of companies in order to gain a little more of an audience. The problem is that people know the Washington Post brand lately very well. They don't need to be reintroduced to it because there's so many negative stories coming out of there. There's so many stories where they're basically arguing and they argue in favor of war. Sometimes they're arguing in favor of corporatism, sometimes in favor of socialism, sometimes in favor of political correctness. Very rarely they'll have kind of a conservative commentator on it. Like the Washington Post is basically sounding like just a corporatist mouthpiece, which it is. Jeff Bezos, I think, I don't know if he really has been able to fulfill the goals that he set for himself when he bought the paper, because they just don't seem to be they don't seem to have the same impact as they used to. And it's the same way with all of these other papers across the country, because last week you of course remember last week there was this layoff at it was the same day as the BuzzFeed layoff. There were layoffs at Gannett, which has that's the USA Today network. So all of these papers across the country owned by Gannett, they just laid off like hundreds of employees.
Yep.
So those are papers of record. In every city there's a paper of record, and I live in Ohio, so we have the Columbus Dispatch and the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Cincinnati.com. I think the Cincinnati, and I don't remember what their paper is, but all of those papers are suffering because people, in order to get local news, they can just go on the internet anytime they want to, and they don't necessarily need the paper of record anymore. And most of those people working for those papers are gatekeepers anyway. Like in my paper, they basically are cucking the entire time for Sherrod Brown, who's our senator. So, people.
And
yeah, go ahead.
Was a really good point about that. Kind of a good segue from what you just said. When you're talking about all these journalists being laid off and having them, having a new need to learn the code. It's funny that when Obama left office, he put in a bill, and it's escaping me at the moment the name of the bill, but it allowed for federal funding of basically propaganda networks. And now we've just seen the largest government shutdown that this country's ever seen. So what I'm getting into is that with all these layoffs happening right after the government shutdown, do you think that the lack of federal funds was the cause of this? You're talking about the HuffPo opinion pieces. Where BuzzFeed had a legitimate reason for the layoffs because they put out that fake news right before it happened. But there were a lot of others like Yahoo News in the crossfire, like Vice News in the crossfire. There have been massive layoffs of all these leftist think tank outlets. And I find it very interesting, the timing that we come out of a very large shutdown where federal funding has been frozen across the country for certain aspects of things. And I find that interesting that they they're now doing the layoffs at that time, even though they weren't putting out particular stories or pushing certain agendas. What do you think?
Well, I don't know how significant that funding was for outlets like Vice, but
Right.
I would say it's much bigger of a problem than that. So that, I mean, if they were getting money for that, it obviously didn't help them that there was a shutdown or that there was a pause in the funding or whatever. But the issue that they're confronting is that in many cases they simply their entire model for business is basically collapsing. I think a few weeks ago, Ellen Pao, who is a former CEO of Reddit, and she's very controversial because she had kind of a flim flam lawsuit for gender discrimination a
I
few years
remember
ago.
that.
So she's basically come out and said, well, all of this method of data gathering in order to show subscriptions and views and clicks and whatever, it's all bullshit. So I don't know if she's completely credible, but the thing is that people are starting to realize that the value of these online publications is not necessarily that great. There's other ways to spread to advertise your business than advertising on BuzzFeed or on Washington Post. In fact, Tim Pool, who we both watch, was making fun of BuzzFeed cookware a few weeks back, which is,
Oh yeah.
I mean, more power to them to sell cookware. I don't care. But the thing is, back in the day, I was just talking about yesterday with the Tom Brokaw video I made, or 2 days ago, that you had a newscaster was just a newscaster. All they would do is they'd present the news, and that's it. Maybe the news was biased, but it was still just the news. Like I remember with
Right.
Peter Jennings back when I was a kid. Peter Jennings is like dead as fuck, but when he just present the news, he'd act super professional, and that way of doing it has gone out the window. The same thing is happening now for the opposite, which is like the clickbaity crap journalism that is promoted by the Huffington Post, because so much of it is just it's oversaturated and people have become desensitized to it. I mean, by the way, it could happen in the future. I don't think that the way that we do it is necessarily going to continue forever. I mean, we're going to have to one day change the paradigm and adapt to something else as well. I mean, who knows?
Of course, and you look at Fusion, you look at all these different companies, they're never profitable. And when I said that the Washington Post was profitable, it's because they've been around for so long and they were basically a monopoly for a very long time in terms of the type of paper they put, in terms of competition. Now everyone has a blog, including us. We're putting out some sort of news stories as well. We basically just cover public record, but it's still, a large pool comparative to when the Washington Post began. So going into the next video really quick, we're going to go into the women empowerment portion of this live stream. We're going to talk about the RAV4 hybrid Toyota ad that was so brave. They had a bunch of girls dressed up as football players and encouraging girls to break their backs and get head injuries. So we'll go right into that next. So let's play that video.
They've said a lot of things about Toni Harris. They said she was too small. They said she was too slow. Too weak. They said she'd never get to the next level. Never inspire a new generation. Never get a football scholarship. Yeah, people have made a lot of assumptions about Toni.
But I've never been a big fan of assumptions.
So much women empowerment, so brave in 2019 to talk about women empowerment in football. thought the left didn't like the sport football, and they thought that it caused ridiculous amounts of head injuries and other types of injuries that their kids shouldn't be playing. But I guess they want women to go into the fray now, and for women to get these brain injuries, and for women to break their spines, their legs, and such. Hello, Saul Cruz in the chat, and also Redskin fan in the chat. Redskin fan says, I hope she gets her head taken off in a vicious tackle. There's a reason sports separate the sexes. I mean, now we're seeing a lot of articles coming out that trans athletic programs and people are rejecting trans women participating in women's sports for good reason, because their bones are more dense. They have wider frames. They're just generally faster because they are men at the end of the day. So I find it interesting that they put out, I don't know what audience they're trying to reach with an ad like this. I don't know, because you have predominantly men watching, conservative men watching NFL. And that's been this whole controversy since the get-go. That's why their numbers are so down. That's why the numbers this year were so down. What's your take on that, Bold?
I would say that what you're like, it's pretty accurate what you're talking about, but it goes even deeper. So the trans athletes, I don't think is really going to be an issue for football, but of course it affects the wider issue of sports that are separated by gender. And you have to realize that I remember when I was going to college, the women's college basketball team actually practiced against regular old dudes that were like pickup basketball players from the, off the street, essentially. Some of these guys were, they were, one of them was a friend of mine, also an engineer who was over 30 years old, bald, and had bad knees. And they would still almost always just have like a close game and sometimes lose to them. So that's the women's varsity basketball team for a Division I school. So think about that. Now,
right. Serena Williams herself, and we're going to get into Serena Williams in a second. Serena Williams herself even said she wouldn't play tennis against the man for that reason. I mean, she knows that any man she says they're two different sports, which they basically are. I mean, you're talking about the miles per hour these things are hit, the speed at which these people are moving around. It's a completely different realm. And I'm not saying that this ad is, inserting women into, she's like not going to play for, with men. But I find it interesting. And I'm not sure exactly what her case is, but it's funny that the left talks about all the injuries of football, how problematic football is, how, all these things that hurt their kids. They should not play football. All this stuff's coming out. You see in movies with Will Smith talking about people with brain injuries with, the NFL and those controversies that have been happening for decades. And they, now they're moving right along and they're encouraging women to do the same thing and for them to get brain injuries as well. I think it's incredible.
Yeah, the thing is that they can't get their message straight because the goals that they have are all contradicting each other. So for many years, they wanted to tear down the game of football in various ways. A couple years ago, they tried to propose that Peyton Manning was a sexual predator because allegedly he harassed a female team doctor. I think it was even when it was either when he was a rookie or when he was still at the University of Tennessee. So their whole point whenever they promote one of these things is to subvert any sort of consumer loyalty to it. And then they get surprised when people do start tuning out and the NFL itself can't promote their bogus ideals that they've gotten them to cave into. So you already mentioned the Kaepernick issue, but when they do all this stuff with overcompensating for the concussions, which let's not pretend that that's not an issue. Now they're doing this whole thing with the girl from the football ad. So I'll tell you what, I looked it up in this Inside Edition story, and apparently she is going to. I mean, guess what top flight football program she's at?
Which one?
Or which she got a scholarship to? The East Los Angeles College Huskies. So
that sounds very well.
Yeah,
very well college.
Well, yes, very woke and very prestigious. I bet Nick Saban is shitting in his pants over in Alabama.
I'm sure they're not singling her out and making it more of a affirmative action thing for women and her skin color, because that's usually the route that they go. They love affirmative action. They love to, prop people up that either shouldn't be hired or shouldn't be in the positions that they're in. And now you're seeing the state of the education system. You're seeing the state of our government. You're seeing all these things that are happening from that. So, I'm all about equal opportunity, but when you force people based on their skin color, I think affirmative action is a racist law at the end of the day. It's pretty astounding that people are actually defending it. And it hurts Asian Americans the most out of all the races that are in the United States currently, which I find interesting when it comes to college applicants, when it comes to getting a job, when it comes to anything. So moving right along, we have our last ad. And before we get into our last ad, please consider donating at Streamlabs. I have the link down below in the description. It's streamlabs.com/forgottenmillennials. That's streamlabs.com/forgottenmillennials. And Bold Like a Leopard is also simulcasting on his channel as well, if you wanted to check that out. And again, we are also on Stream Me. So if you want to join us on Stream Me as well, we are trying to make the move. I'm starting it from a baseline up to get onto Stream Me. I think a lot of us are trying to make this move permanently. So right now, let's go into this ad, the Serena Williams Bumble ad. Bumble itself is all about empowering women. It's about women choosing first. Even though any women I speak to that use the service Bumble tell me that they cannot get dates on Bumble. They tell me that Bumble is a pretty trash service, and now they are at war with Tinder, and Tinder of which added 37 new genders. So when you're swiping in Tinder, it's very likely that you will be swiping on a man and not even know it until it is too late. So I found that interesting. So this is Serena Williams Bumble commercial. Let's dive into the empowerment and the diversity.
Tells you to wait. That waiting is polite, and good things will just come. But if I waited to be invited in, I never would have stood out. If I waited for change to happen, I never would have made a difference. So make the first move. Don't wait to be told your place. Take it. Don't wait for people to find you. Find them. In work, in love, in life. And most of all, don't wait to be given power. Because here's what they won't tell you. We already have it. 'Cause I'm a soldier. Lit through the fire. I started with nothing. I've got nothing to lose.
All right, that was the Bumble ad with Serena. And it's funny, I find it funny that Bumble, they decided to go the route of, we're going to attach people for business as well. We're going to attach people with BFFs on a dating app. I don't know how successful the other, two aspects of it are, but it's kind of weird to go through Bumble Biz. And I've actually went through Bumble Biz for shits and giggles. It's pretty woke. I'm not going to lie. It is pretty woke. Have you ever seen that stuff, Bold?
No, I think a couple years ago I had Bumble, and it seemed like a huge waste of time because, first of all, I think like it's even worse than Tinder because for some reason I think I don't even remember what it was. I think like you would get responses from people, but typically they ask you like inane crap that had nothing to do with the profile that you put up. So they'd assume I don't remember. It was a ridiculous app, and I think it was kind of a huge waste of time. And I think it's kind of strange that they picked her for this ad too, because Serena Williams, the woman who she complained to that line judge earlier this year. I had a video on my channel that had tons of views making fun of her outburst to that line judge. And she's whining the whole time about, I'm a mother, I would never lie, blah, blah, blah. It's like,
and she did.
Yeah, so anyway, she's married. So what does that have to do with Bumble? She's this isn't what's it called, Ashley Madison, right? So that would have made a little sense if you think about it. If it was an Ashley Madison ad.
Yeah, they got the power, right? They got the power of the
Yeah.
dogs too.
Yeah, no. I think I would have put it. You have an escape route. That would have been Ashley. That would have been hilarious if they would have put her there. The other thing I can't, and no offense to Serena Williams, who I think is like one of the best tennis players ever, but
Right.
whenever I see her, like when they, for example, they did the upskirt on the video, I always remember that it was only a few years ago that Jamie Foxx and I think Marlon Wayans were impersonating her because she's so muscular. She looks tougher than a dude. I think she could probably whoop my ass. So that's not a good look for a Bumble. And no offense, again, I think she's an amazing tennis player, which I really respect the sport of tennis. So, I'm not trying to be kind of politically correct here, but
I don't think we're ever trying to be politically correct, Bold.
I know, but this is not a good look for a Bumble ad. I'm just saying.
Hey, she's got a better look than Michelle Obama. I'll go with that. I'll take that to the grave.
I mean, I think it used to be. I'll tell you the truth. The Williams sisters, like when they started like really winning all these titles, Grand Slam titles, I was like, yeah, these might be the best athletes in tennis, or probably for a while. There was no clear superstar in baseball, for example. So I was like, yeah, they might be one of the best athletic pairs in the world. But lately, because they all the success went to their head, I just don't see the same charisma in them anymore. So no, I think I look at them kind of the same way as I do Michelle Obama, maybe a little less mean.
Yep. And it's funny, man. I think with all this women empowerment, it actually is hurting women the most. They're essentially turning women into men. You're talking about statistics like, the suicide rates going up there, just life expectancy just going down in general. Just overall happiness is down in general. They find themselves when they're 40 to wonder what happened, and they have no kids, or they get all abortions, and they don't care what's going on until it's too late. They're so empowered. Now they're the life expectancy is starting to equal out between men and women. And when you're talking about the pay gap as well, the pay gap is technically there, but it's there for a multitude of reasons no one talks about, like hours worked, where they work, what type of jobs they work. There's so many different aspects about it, and no one's being truthful about it. They just see a number there, and that's the thing that they'll go with and they'll run with through propaganda. So yeah, this was a pretty short stream. Wanted to test out Restream, and again, thank you guys for joining us on YouTube and also Stream Me and also Periscope. We are on Periscope now as well. The echoing in the beginning. Hope you guys. Thanks for sticking around past that. We did have multiple. I have about, I think, 5 different streams going on with different sounds. So thanks for bearing with us. And do you have any other last words for us, Bull, before we hop off this?
Yeah, I hope I didn't throw off your introduction because I was trying to see if you heard me.
No.
Yeah. Other than that, I think that eventually, if the Super Bowl and the NFL doesn't change its ways, I mean, we didn't even talk about the halftime show, so we might have to.
Oh yeah, before we get off, guys, with Adam Levine, they have a problem with his nipples. Apparently, this is like a thing. Like they're gonna talk about Adam Levine's nipple showing. I'm like, that's outrageous. Like why he took his shirt off, which is hilarious. I remember watching a clip from Joe Rogan. He was talking about this. He made a good point where, that. He's around the biggest athletes on earth, right? He's around the most muscular men you could possibly have. And then you got this guy looking like a preteen comparatively, taking his shirt off. I find that hilarious. And he starts off in like a jacket and then he basically ends with his shirt off. He must have worked up some sort of sweat. But Adam Levine also was he was hyping up the Super Bowl halftime show. He's like, oh, women have to be heard and like all this SJW bullshit right before he went on stage. And I found that hilarious. And, I think his producers or whoever, his agent went up to him and said that, it was, he's going to have to cool his jets on that because it would be a firestorm for him. So I think he did cool his jets in a way, but then he took his shirt off, and that just set off another firestorm. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't really. I think Adam Levine and Maroon 5 are kind of like they're very generic music, and I think it's part of the pattern of the NFL not taking any risks in many of their Super Bowl acts, even though they put in Travis Scott this year and they had to censor part of it because of the profanity in the lyrics, which kind of begs the question, what's the point of even having him if you have to censor part of the audio? But
yeah, they know.
Yeah, so what I mean, it's stupid because people are watching it at home and they're like listening to all these blank audio spots in the middle of the broadcast. It's a horrible. It was horrible, but with Adam Levine, the thing is, you could criticize him all you want, and I don't really think Maroon 5 is great music by any stretch of the imagination. But you did donate.
Like Coldplay.
I think Coldplay is significantly worse, but they donated $500,000 to I guess a children's charity ahead of the Super Bowl. So he did put his money where his mouth is, I guess, if you want to put it that way. Travis Scott also apparently donated a lot of his Super Bowl payout. So I think people should just back off and let the performance itself wasn't that good, and they at least did something good out of it. So that's really the only thing you can take out of it.
Right. Alrighty. So yeah, that was that quick live stream. I'm glad we were able to sit down with you guys. Thanks everybody for watching the stream, joining us on multiple websites. We should be past the technical milestones now. I have now figured it out. So in terms of sound, I think we'll be able to, and we put this stream up pretty late. It was pretty last minute put together. So, enjoyed your company, enjoyed the people in the chat, and we'll do it again soon.
All right, thanks a lot. And I guess I'll be watching the State of the Union tonight. But thanks again for having me. And I'll tell my subscribers to subscribe to your channel. It's Forgotten Millennials with 2 N's. I always forget the second N.
And this is Bold Like a Leopard with me. So any of my subscribers want to subscribe to him. The man does good research and he has good content. So until next time, we'll plan something out. And have a good night, everybody.
Good night.